Welcome to the Connect with BMC Helix ITSM webinar series. During today's event, you're able to ask questions of our panelists. The questions and answers, along with today's broadcast, will be published to our YouTube channel. Today's topic is leveraging REST for enterprise integration. Vaibhav Wadekar and LJ Longwing will take us through this content today. I'll turn it over to LJ.
Thank you, Greg. I'm LJ Longwing, lead product developer here at BMC in the Platinum Engineering team. Today, we are talking about leveraging REST for enterprise integrations. The agenda for today's webinar is going to be using REST for enterprise integration, troubleshooting those calls, and references. REST is going to provide you a flexible and scalable option for bridging the gap between systems. You can use REST to integrate information from your system into another system or get information from another system and pull it back into your system. REST supports all the modern encryption and authentication schemes, OAuth, TLS, and such. And when you combine the various options available, it really allows for endless integration capabilities. When using REST, there are three main methods you are going to use. One of them is going to be GET. GET is going to provide you the ability to, as its name suggests, get information from a remote system. This is generally going to be a query of some sort to provide you with information from the remote system. A POST is going to be either a create or an instantiation of a process. An example of a create would be in Remedy. If you were to issue a create against HPT Help Desk, that would create a record in HPT Help Desk. Another example of a post would be getting a token. This is generally a post call that is going to be used to provide your username and your password, and the output of that post call is going to be a token. The third most common one that you're going to be using is going to be a put. A put is going to be where you are updating information in the remote system. You are typically going to be providing, as part of your input, the record you're going to be updating. Other types of methods that you could possibly use, depending on the service that you're talking to, are going to be a patch. A patch is similar to a put, but instead of specifying the entire record that you're going to be updating, sometimes you are just going to be providing one or two elements that you're trying to change. A delete operation, as its name indicates, is going to generally be the opposite of a post. It's going to be removing a record from the remote system. Options is going to be one where you will be calling it to get information about the service. Head is going to be one that is similar to get, but doesn't actually perform the get. It's going to provide you essentially with an output to tell you the structure of the call that you're making. Any and all of these methods are going to be implemented per the service that you are talking to. So it's very important when you're working with REST to read the documentation of the service you're interacting with. Some or all of these may be available, some might not be. So it's important to understand the system that you are talking to and what methods and information they need in those particular methods. Generally, when you're making REST calls, you're going to have one or more ways of providing information into the remote system that you're calling. The first one is going to be parameters. Okay, this is more often used in GET calls. Your parameters are going to be along the lines of, I've got parameter 1, and its value is ABC. Parameter 2, this has spaces. So notice when you are dealing with a parameter that is URL based, you have to ensure that whatever values you are providing in that are going to be properly URL encoded. In this case, %20 is the URL equivalent of a space. The second way that you provide information to the remote system is via headers. These are going to be pretty universal regardless of what method you are calling. The most common one that you're going to be providing is an authorization header, and it's going to be either in the form of a bearer token, an ARJWT token in the case of Remedy, a basic encoded value, which would be your username and password, or really any other authorization header that is supported by the system that you are making a call to. Another common header you're going to see is a content type. This tells the remote system what type of content is going to be in the body of the call that you are making. Most systems are going to accept application JSON to let them know that it's expecting JSON structure in the body. There's also application XML, multi-part form data. Multi-part form data is typically used when you are providing attachments. And then when you're talking multi-part form data, you're going to provide a boundary definition. In this case, the boundary is XYZ, and then the body, it would contain that boundary, and then you would contain multiple sections that are going to be the different parts of that particular call. Again, documentation on the service you're calling is going to be vital for you to be able to set up what your content type is supposed to be. Accept is very similar to content type, but it is the response information. So you're telling in content type what type of information you are providing to the remote system. The accept header is going to be what type of information you accept back from the remote sender. Some services are going to allow you to specify, I want XML returned, I want JSON returned, or I want, everything, whatever you want to provide me, which is what */* is. Depending on the type of call you're making, content length is going to be appreciated or required. This is the byte length of the body. The third place you're going to generally be providing input is going to be the body. I say it's typically a JSON document or array, but sometimes, depending on the service, it's going to require XML input or just plain text input. It really depends on the remote system and what it was designed to accept as inputs. A JSON document is going to start with a squirrely bracket and end with a squirrely bracket and have one or more keys in it. Okay, an array is generally going to contain multiple JSON documents. An array starts with a square bracket and ends with a square bracket. And you can have arrays within documents and documents within arrays. When you make calls to remote systems, you are going to get a response code. The response code generally for a successful, depending on if you're doing a get, a put, or a post, is going to be either a 200, a 201, or a 202. So a 200 is generally going to be for a get. A 201 is going to tell you this was created. Okay, that'll generally be for a post. And the 202 is going to be when you're doing a put or a patch, letting you know that you asked the remote system to do it. The 202 does not necessarily mean that the update has been applied. It is just an indication from the remote system that your request has been accepted. If you're going to receive an error message, it's generally going to be in the 400 or the 500 range. 400 is indicating that something the client did is not proper. So you are going to need to fix something on your end. The bad request is generally very common when it is saying that the URL that you sent to is valid, but the request that you sent to that URL is not valid. So you might not have provided some required input. You might not have required, it might not be in the proper format, something along those lines. A 401 is an unauthorized, meaning that you have not authenticated. A 403 means you've authenticated, but you are not authorized to process the URL or the record or something on the other end. 404 is a generic error message that simply says the thing you are trying to reach does not exist where you have asked for it to be. So this I've seen both in the situation of making a call to the wrong URL, or I've also seen this in situations where you are making a valid call, but the call you are making, you don't have permission to. So this is similar to forbidden, but in security conscious applications, instead of telling you you've reached a valid record that you don't have access to, that provides information that they might not want to provide back to you. So a 404 could be the URL you're reaching does not exist, or it could be you don't have access to that record. 405 is going to tell you that the method you are trying to do is not allowed. So If you were reaching a URL that was designed for a GET and you were trying to do a POST to it, you might get a 405 error message. So those are all client-side errors, things that the client is doing that didn't work properly. The 500 series are generally server-side errors. These are not things that you yourself are doing wrong. These are something that the remote system is having trouble processing internally. Okay, the most common ones in this series are the 500, which is the internal server error, and the 503, service unavailable. Both of these are not your problem. They are the remote system's problem that you are connecting to, and you will have to work with the remote system to identify what it is that needs to be done to get these fixed. Anytime you're receiving a 400 or a 500 error, these are going to be things that you can usually work with the remote system, the system admins, to find out what your call is doing wrong. Integration examples. One of the most common things that we hear is, what can I do with REST? Here are some examples of things that you can do with a REST integration to provide better capabilities within your system. So within the Amazon S3 bucket, you can instantiate a service. Provision storage. Within Box, you can provision storage. Within Jira, you can create or update records or get records. You can get details out of Jira. Within Office 365, you can generate an email. You can update account parameters, extend quotas, extend storage capabilities. And the one that we're going to be demoing today, Jenkins, the ability to invoke a pipeline with parameters through Digital Workplace. And here I hand it off to Vaibhav to take over the discussion of integrating with Jenkins.
Thank you, LJ, for a wonderful explanation on REST terminologies. Hi, my name is Vaibhav Wadekar. I am Premier Support Architect here at BMC Software. So we're going to take a quick glance at how we can integrate Jenkins pipelines with the help of a Digital Workplace Catalog. So consider a business scenario where an end user would like to request a new lab environment. Okay, and in current scenario, if there is no automation, the way it's going to work like this. So user is going to contact the help desk agent for requesting a new lab environment. And then once the help desk create a case, he can assign that case to the provisioning team. Then the provisioning teams runs the Jenkins job to spin up an additional lab environment for the end user. Then the help desk user communicates back to the end user stating your request has been fulfilled and send an email about the same. So this is in the manual intervention. Now let's take a look at the automation. So in this example, what we're going to do is we're going to create a service within Data Workplace Catalog, which eventually going to call the Jenkins job on a specified date and time. The flow is going to work like this. The end user will access the Detailed Workplace portal. Once he submit the request on the mentioned date for the user, the DWPC will then invoke the Jenkins job, and once the job is completed, it will send an email to the end user and also set the request to completed status. So in this example, you can see that there is no manual intervention, everything is automated, and we're going to take a look how we can achieve this. So before doing any further service creations within DWP catalog, the first thing that we would like to find it out is how we can invoke the Jenkins job. In order to invoke the Jenkins job from the postman, we need certain parameters. The first parameter that we need is a Jenkins pipeline job endpoint URL with which we can invoke the job. The second parameter that we need is authorization header, which is nothing but what kind of authentication you're going to do. The third thing that we need is the API token, which is the Jenkins Scrum. Again, in the demo, I'll show you how to get that. Again, the rule of thumb to make any service catalog creation successful is test the REST API integration outside of Data Workplace Catalog first to make sure that you were able to invoke it successfully. Now we have looked at this Postman example and able to invoke the Jenkins job. Let's move ahead and try to see if we can build a service out of it. As you can see on my screen, this is the Digital Workplace workflow that we are building with the help of Process Designer that is available within the Digital Workplace catalog. And I actually draw a couple blocks in the canvas, and I'm going to explain you what are those blocks basically are. In terms of process, the first thing that we need to do is we need to configure the REST connector. Within this REST connector, all we are doing is we are giving the URL for the Jenkins job. I'll explain that how we configure the REST connector within my demo section. The second part to it was the building the workflow. So as you can see on this canvas, we have actually 4 or 5 blocks here. First thing that we are doing with this build input set is we are setting up 2 values within the build input set. First thing is authorization. And the second thing that we are doing is the Jenkins scrub header. So those are the 2 parameters that we have looked in the Postman example. We are setting that as a build input set. And the output of that, we are actually feeding that to the scheduled receive task. So basically this receive task, what we are doing here is in order for us to spin up the lab on the specific date and time, what we are asking user, okay, tell me what time you would like to invoke this job. The way it calculates is with the help of the timer. So it actually uses the present time minus the scheduled time, and that will give this receive task a time that it needs to wait until to invoke the Jenkins job. The next block that you can see right here is the invoking the Jenkins pipelines. So when I say invoking Jenkins pipelines, what we are doing, we are just doing a send HTTP request. And with this send HTTP request, as you can see that we are setting some values over in the right side. The first thing is the body parser. Here, the body parser can be JSON, can be text. So here we are just sending it as a text. The connection ID is nothing but the Jenkins REST API connector that we have configured in the first steps. Then the method, we are invoking post method here. So that's why we are calling it as a post method. And the URI section, I just give the URI for the Jenkins job again. And the header section, as you can see, we are feeding back the data that is coming from the set HTTP headers. Those headers will include the authorization header and the Jenkins Scrum header. So once we invoke the job and once this job gets completed, as you can see, the next step in this block is setting this request into completed status. So this is all been done. Once the user submit the request, it will do automatic things. There is no manual intervention needed on this one. So the use case that we are going to look at is we would like to promote the code with the help of Jenkins pipelines on a scheduled basis. And we would like to achieve this as part of digital workplace catalog service request. I'm just going to share my screen. The interface that I open is the Jenkins pipelines. So this is a small test job that I have created called Vaibhav test job. So if I click on build now, this is the way you can initiate the Jenkins pipelines. As you can see, the moment we click on build now, it eventually created a job here and then if we look at the console output right here, you can see it successfully executed the code. This is just a simple hello world example that I have written. You can do many things with the Jenkins pipelines. I also talk about a couple of things like Jenkins Scrum and authorization header. So first thing first, let me show you how we can get the API token. So on this login screen right here, and from here, if you can click on configure, you can create a token here. So I already create a token, add new token. So this is the token that we have to pass in within the authorization header. The other thing that I mentioned is about the Jenkins Scrum header. So in order to get the Jenkins Scrum header, you have to issue a command, your Jenkins server name, followed by Scrum issuer API JSON. So this is the value that we are actually putting into the Jenkins Scrum header. Now let's take a quick glance and take a look at the Postman. As I indicated, so this is my Postman interface. As you can see that within this interface, you can see that the method I'm using is a post. This is the job name. And the header that we are setting is the authorization header and Jenkins Scrum header. Authorization header, the value that we are getting is admin : the API token. I use a base 64 encoder and encode that value and put that encoded value over here. And then I set up the Jenkins Scrum value just as it's. So let me try and see if I can able to create a Jenkins thing. So I just issued a thing. As you can see, the request is 201. So it actually created that. As you can see, it executed the last job, 25th. That was the job that we executed from the Postman, and it was successful. And this is the interface of digital workplace catalog. And within services, as you can see in the connector sections, I actually configured a connector for the Jenkins. So this is my Jenkins job that I configured here. And if I open that, you can see that this is the endpoint URI actually given here. As you can see, the first block is HTTP headers. As you can see that we are using a key value pair. And here I set up the Jenkins scrub and authorization header. The next block in this the workflow is the receive task. So in the receive task, we are acting upon the deployment start date. And this is the timer where we are actually putting up expression that we would like to kicking in this job when the date actually meets the criteria. Here is the exclusive gateway that we have put in. And this is the invoke Jenkins pipeline. Within that, as you can see, we are actually passing this Jenkins job, and this is the URI, and this is the headers from the build input set. And this is where we are setting it up, set service request status. I'm on the DWP, and then here I'm going to search for code promotion, and here I'm just going to request it. I'm going to submit the request. As you can see that the request is in the progress. Now let me just quickly show you the reports. Once the process executed, what actually happened. Request actually set to the completed status. So let's see whether the request is in the completed status. So we are in this DWP back, and you can see that the code promotion activity has been completed successfully. And let's actually see whether it actually initiates that Jenkins job or not. As you can see, the last job that it executed was 26. And here you can see that it took 26 milliseconds and it was the success. That completes the demo. As you can see on my slide, the next thing that we would like to discuss about is the troubleshooting. As you know, there are times when things doesn't go as planned, and we need to make sure that we were able to detect the problem and able to correct it in a short time. So let's just quickly discuss how we can troubleshoot the integrations problem. The first thing that we need to do is the validations. In terms of validation, what we can do is we can do like executing the Jenkins job from the Jenkins UI as we saw in the demo. Then the second part, we can see that if it is successful, the next part will be executing the Jenkins job from the postman, whether there is any authorization headers or any Jenkins scrum that got changed over a period of time. In order to validate that, we're going to execute the Jenkins job from postman. If that is also successful, then we can take a look at the DWP side by submitting the request if the request is actually going into the false status. Whenever you hover into the false status, it will normally give you the reason for the failure. And if you're unable to determine the reason or the cause, the first thing that you could do is you can turn on the developer tools log from the browser and try to see what is the result of the post method where we're invoking the Jenkins job. That will give you an indication whether it is HTTP 500 that it was unable to reach to the endpoint, or whether it's 401 not authorized, or what sort of error that we are getting when we're submitting a request. The second part that we can do is we can go to the DWP catalog as a catalog administrator, and then we can go to the service request and report section and check the particular request that was submitted. When you look at the process, you can see the error stack been produced there if there is any error. And with that help of that error, you can actually correct those errors. So that's the second part while debugging the problem. Let's say if you're unable to determine the problem from the browser tool or from the DWPC service request report, the final thing that we could do is we can turn on some REST connector debug logging and the bundle logs that is available within the DWP catalog. And you can get this information how to enable this log in our troubleshooting guide. As you can see that on my screen, we have a troubleshooting guide for each and every component. And same goes for BMC Helix Detail Workplace. So in the troubleshooting section, you might find steps around how to enable the debug logging for a specific connector or how to enable the debug logging. So this troubleshooting guides really helps you to achieve the task when you run into an issues. These are some of the references I would like to highlight. So the first thing, the HTTP status code, which actually give you a nice overview of the kind of what is HTTP 200 means, what is HTTP 404, or what is HTTP 401, what is HTTP 500 means. So this, it will get you familiar with the error codes while you're debugging the issues and whatnot. It really comes in handy. The second part is the Jenkins. So if you're unaware of Jenkins and if you'd like to learn about what is Jenkins, how to create simple job before you go into complex example like parameterize pipelines, you can take a quick glance on this Jenkins reference reference material that I have given here, there are various ways you can authenticate within Jenkins, like session base or OAuth2 base. So different methods of authentication also been listed on the in the URL that I mentioned here. The third part is the digital workplace in the reference sections. So I've given a quick link about the REST connector, what all things that you can do with this REST connector. And the second link talks about the troubleshooting side of it. So now we have looked through the entire webinar. I think let's come back to the summary part of it. So we have looked at the REST API usage. That includes what are the different REST API methods that we can leverage, and what are the error codes, and how to invoke different kind of REST APIs. That includes many examples as given by LJ in the earlier session. In the second, we looked at the Jenkins integration example where we invoked the Jenkins job with the help of Data Workplace Catalog. We created a service and we executed that job on a specific date and time. And this is actually the automation that we are wanting to leverage within the DWP. The next thing that we looked at is the troubleshooting, the integration piece. What are the ways available to us in order to troubleshoot the integrations? I hope you found this session useful. That concludes our presentation. Back to you, Greg.
Thank you. And now I'll take us through the self-help in contacting BMC. The YouTube channel where this webinar will be posted is listed here. It contains past webinars as well as a rich set of how-to videos. The Connect with BMC Helix ITSM and Remedy webinar schedule is available at this community's link, and the Hot Off the Press newsletter for trending information is available at this community's post. As always, contacting technical support via web, phone, email, and these social channels is available. At this time, that will conclude this webinar. Thank you for attending.